Hello, welcome back. It's episode 166 of Grow Yourself Up. Delighted to be back with you. And today I want to talk about something that's really insidious in terms of how we operate as adults when we haven't had our needs met in childhood. And that is something called overfunctioning, where we overfunction in multiple areas of our life and we literally kind of overextend ourselves beyond our body limits continuously because we haven't learned to be in touch with our felt sense of our own reality. Perhaps we've always pushed past tiredness. We've had to operate above our developmental pay grade since we were tiny. And so it feels really familiar. So I think there's two cycles that are really, really important to break. And of course, they always start with shifting first because it's hard to actually break a cycle quickly. The first one is we have to really break the cycle of shaming and criticizing ourselves. So for many of us, we are very, very focused on breaking cycles for our children, giving them a different experience to that which we had. And we can forget ourselves in that and apply like a strong perfectionist lens to this idea of breaking cycles. But within that, like if you are not included in the breaking cycles, then you're not really breaking cycles because you're continuing to really oppress yourself. That makes sense? So like really shifting away from shaming and self-criticizing yourself is absolutely vital. That's like the top one, I would say, to really focus on for yourself. And the second one is this stepping away from overfunctioning. So breaking that cycle of overfunctioning. And I know that in the UK now we're in a period of school holidays, and that can be a period where lots of parents are actually forced to overfunction in many ways because you're trying to work as if you don't have children and have children as if you don't have a job. So there's a definite sort of societal element to this because of the patriarchal capitalist system we live in. And there's in the ways in which we oppress ourselves in terms of this idea of I need to deliver this, or I need to behave like this, or I need to offer this type of holiday to my children, or I need to be this type of parent all the time. And that overfunctioning really doesn't serve us, and it also does not serve our children. So I want to talk a bit about why that arises, and also to just invite you to step away from doing that in the little ways that you can initially. Because when something has kept us safe, when it's been one of our survival strengths or coping mechanisms, it's really difficult to start to change it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I really want to acknowledge how complex it is to step away from our survival strengths because they've kept us alive. They've kept us safe and they've kept us alive. And initially, the feeling of not behaving in that way, so the feeling of not overfunctioning, is so profoundly uncomfortable in our own body that it feels like we might be doing the wrong thing. So we really have to learn to tolerate those uncomfortable sensations coming from our body in order to make a change. And, having enough capacity in our systems, enough capacity to notice, enough of a big enough container to tolerate these sensations, to notice what they might mean, to hear what they might be trying to tell us. That really takes time because if we keep on coming back to this idea that many of us have had to be disembodied to survive. So we've had to shut down aspects of our experience. So whether we've dissociated, really split them off, whether we kind of had to float away aspects of our own experience in order to actually tolerate our physical lived reality. So we don't have many linkages between our body and our brain, essentially. And many of us have done that by dampening our own responses to our interoception. And so what we're trying to do here is actually reestablish those connections and allow ourselves to really notice our own experience, to really attend to it in the moment, to act based on our own experience, to act based on what our body is telling us. But this it's a progression. It's really a progression because if I look at myself, I have really celebrated being a super operator in my life. I viewed it as being really, really efficient, that I could really get a lot done, that I used to sometimes compare myself to my husband and think I was much more efficient than him and much more of a super operator than him because I had so much capacity. And I've kind of come to see that as really not such a positive thing, really, and that I may have a lot of capacity, but it's capacity which I've created by drinking a lot of tea and eating a lot of chocolate. So I talked a long time ago on Instagram about what were you trained for in childhood and how there's a gap between what our body actually says we can manage and between how many of us operate. And then what do we use to fill that gap? And so for many years, I've used caffeine and sugar and kind of just denial and ignoring my body. And it's been a process of really narrowing that gap and coming back into the limits of what my actual physical body can manage. But, wherever you are in the cycle, be really gentle with yourself because you might still be in a stage of really considering yourself to be a super operator and really celebrating that and maybe castigating the people around you who are not such super operators. I really want to suggest that for many of us, a healing journey involves doing less over time, taking on less, withstanding less, stopping to overfunction all these different areas. And it still can feel profoundly uncomfortable because there's loss and there's grief mixed up in that. There's grief in not being such a super operator anymore. And, when I said, what were you set up for in childhood, the thread which runs through so much of this is this piece about emotional neglect and not being connected to ourselves and not noticing our own experience. And all the research literature on emotional neglect talks about acts of omission. So they characterize that what was traumatic in childhood was these acts of omission. We didn't get tended to emotionally. We didn't get supported. We didn't get seen. We didn't get help with processing, understanding, acting from, learning to tolerate or understand what our body sensations and emotions meant. And so go back to the episodes around emotional flow, which were in the earlier hundreds, if you want to kind of hear more about this. We don't just suddenly become more in touch with the emotional signaling from our body. This is really a process of starting to tend to ourselves. But with these acts of omission, that basically that gives us such a massive clue, because what we do then is we omit ourselves. So when we received parenting like this, which is extremely common, and because of the parenting practices I talked about right at the beginning in episode 1, because of parenting practices where we've basically ignored babies' needs, where mainstream advice has said, don't respond to your baby's hunger cues, don't respond to them if they're crying, don't spoil them, leave them to cry, train them to sleep. All those messages are not tending to a baby's needs. So they are facilitating a disconnection right from the beginning in the baby's body. They're facilitating what the baby needs to disconnect from aspects of experience, because it's really painful if you're a tiny baby and you're hungry, but your mum has learned that she must only feed you every 4 hours. And there's so much profound, deep grief and sadness, because some of you listening may have had this done to you, and some of you listening may have done this yourself. There's a lot of nuance and complexity in this, and how we hold our grief for our own experience, and our grief for how we may have parented in ways that we don't think are optimal, or in ways we might have wished to change now. And I want to honor that for each of us. I also have aspects like that. So, really hold yourself kindly. But what this all means is that if we haven't been these acts of omission, so I was talking there about feeding and sleeping routines. Emotional neglect relates more to the emotional tending we did not receive, where we haven't learned about our own emotional landscape. But those acts of omission mean that in adult life, what I see continuously clinically is that we omit ourselves. It's almost as if we just don't know that we need to actually tend to ourselves. We exist like as a hologram in our own life. And so I really want you to picture a circle, and that circle is a circle of care. And I want you to push yourself into the center of that circle of care, particularly in the school holidays. You really need to push yourself into that circle of care. Tend to yourself. Notice what you might need. Don't overfunction in terms of trying to offer, some sort of magic hands experience of a holiday. Because we have to kind of really become conscious of the ways in which we might still omit ourselves. So I'll tell you a story. I have had a very intense period. I came out of a very intense work period, intense for different reasons, a deadline on something and just various other bits and bobs all kind of coming together in the same month and time. And then basically on the first day that I had that didn't involve like a big deadline or other work things, I decided it would be a good idea for my family and I to go to this lovely garden I like to visit because there's lots of tulips in bloom, and I thought, that would be so resourcing. But even when I was thinking about that, I was like thinking, that's maybe a bit too much because you might just need to rest on that day and you might need to have something that's more low key, because you'll really have to kind of mobilize yourself quite early in the morning and like make a picnic and maybe grill some chicken or I don't know, whatever, like take some stuff with you. But I was like, no, it's important that we do this. It'll be really nice. It'll be like bonding, and I had all these ideas, but it would require me to overfunction essentially. So I'd have to like get up early. I hate getting up early. This was on a weekend. Like early mornings are not my thing. And like pack picnics and all this palavering. And then I was like, no, I'm not actually sure this will work. I really had to conceptualize it. Well, I really had to kind of think about what would work for me, what will help me be in connection with the people in my family. And as it turned out, the weather on that day wasn't brilliant. And I said to my husband, I don't think I've got the capacity for this. It's too much for me. And we landed up having a very chilled out day, one of those days where like, maybe the only thing you do is brush your teeth. I did sort of put on some kind of random clothes. So I did get dressed. And then I did actually take my kids to the shops to fetch something we needed to fetch. But we played some games at home. I made them. I felt like I was a cafe, actually. Sometimes at my house, it feels like we're a cafe all day. But we had a very chilled out day at home and it was very connecting. My girls fought a lot, but it seems to be the way it is in our house sometimes. And I didn't overfunction. I just like had quite a restful day doing the things that I needed to do. And there was a lot of connection. So there's often a fantasy that comes where we imagine that we have to go outside of the house to have these like fantasy outings where often I imagine I'll be different to how I am and my kids will be different to how I am because I want to facilitate connection. But really the connection comes when we are more present in our systems, when we are calmer, when we have capacity, when we can meet our own needs. So I really had to step away from this idea of some sort of perfect, like what would a perfect mum do, or what would be good, and just step into, what would work for me that day. What does simple connection look like that day? And to stop first of all hooking into some societal fantasy and stop omitting myself. So I really want you to consider these ideas. Notice the circle of care in your family. Notice, where are you in that circle of care? Are you inside the circle even? Because you may be so used to omitting yourself that you are completely outside the circle. Maybe you're not even in a circle. I want you to push yourself into that center in every way that you can. And really notice where you're still shaming and criticizing yourself, and try gently to to speak more kindly to yourself and look at the places where you're continually overfunctioning and training yourself, or like doing the role you were trained for in childhood, where you were operating way above your developmental pay grade continuously. And really consider that, especially if you've got children who are on holiday now, and you may still have to work. I don't know what your situation is, but really, really notice your capacity. Notice, where are you in the circle of care? That might change. I mean, if you've got a sick child, you may be more on the outer edges of the circle of care for a while. Notice how you have to pull your attention to yourself and not omit yourself. Notice that the impacts of emotional neglect are really insidious in terms of how we pay attention to ourselves. So I want to gently invite you to pay a bit more attention to yourself. And I hope that you can have some joyful moments over this time. There's multiple different holidays. It's been the end of Ramadan. It's Easter coming up, and like whoever celebrates Easter, there's all these different holidays going on. So please tend gently to yourselves in this world that is continuing to burn. And I hope that you can include yourself in the circle of care and step away from trying to overfunction in all these different areas. Okay, I'm sending you a lot of love.